Okay, YouTube is starting. Good morning, everybody. It's 8 o'clock. Welcome to Non-Farm Payrolls Friday, Friday the 3rd of November 2023. We're on a drive up to settlement, but anyway, let's do the disclaimers, and I hope everybody is well. All Bookmap Limited materials, information, and presentations are for educational purposes only and should not be considered specific investment advice nor recommendations. Trading futures, equities, and digital currencies involves substantial risk of loss and is not suitable for all investors. Past performance is not necessarily indicative of future results. Okay, with that being done, that's the screens are right now, so we've got about 29 minutes until the non-farm payrolls, and essentially since just after 7 a.m. Eastern in the US, there's been a drive up. So we're driving back up towards yesterday's settlement, and we have this resting iceberg here in ES that I pointed out in the room that's taken a long time to play out. Anyway, they're just positioning themselves for non-farm payroll, so it sounds like, or seems like, they don't want any change from where the market closed yesterday. So it'll be interesting to see if we go up above that before 8:30. And for today, I have endeavored to make sure that the financial juice stream is fed through the audio, so that it should be audible on both Discord and YouTube. I'm actually listening to it now at a very low volume in my headphones. Right, okay, that said, let's quickly go on to the slideshow so we can do some prep. I'm just going to use the TradingView calendar going forward and just focus on the important category, the red category items, just so that it's just easier to show. So for our hour, we've got the non-farm payrolls, and at 10 o'clock you've got the ISM PMI. And yeah, this is something I might touch on later. It's the earnings calendar. It's hidden inside the TradingView website. It's totally free, but on a week like this where Apple, amongst others, have had their earnings, it's a page worth checking out. So you can do the sort by market cap, and you can have this week and next week, so you can see what's coming up. So next week, for example, we've got Berkshire Hathaway. So that's the biggest earnings release next week. Okay. Moving along, let's have a look. So what we were talking about the other day was there was a break of this reverse trend line that joins the lows, and that is normally very, very bullish. And on this occasion, it has acted out that way, and we've had a very, very good bounce. And we are supposedly on our way towards this, towards a high where we could easily get to that 50-day moving average, even the 400s, and depends on many factors, none of which we can forecast or predict. Moving along to NQ. Yeah, there was no reverse trend line. I pointed out the other day it's invalid because it was not steeper than the actual down trend line, but we've had a very, very good bounce, and you can see that. And moving on to the 10 minutes, just to work out where we are in ETH, shaded in grey. And basically for ES, we're hovering in the top quartile of yesterday's range. So it's remained very, very bullish. And right now, as you're no doubt aware, we are quite close to settlement. NQ, again, I think we're actually further up than when I took this screenshot a little while ago. Oh, no, actually we're right about there, about the 964 mark. So again, well above yesterday's mid and yesterday's RTH low. That's not the overall Globex low, that's yesterday's RTH low. But again, very, very bullish. Okay, and let's just get those back on. Let's just drag along a couple of things. So let's go through the TPO here, because I did talk about that the other day. By the way, if anybody's got any questions, I always forget. Let me just get rid of that. It's just some time and sales. It doesn't really matter, but let's try. They're going to be visible, so just temporarily we can ignore them. There's just some time and sales that I like to have in a small format. It's because I've dragged this chart over from Sierra. They have come to the top of the screen. Anyway, we want to remind ourselves that we took out one of those version points of control, and it's actually quite a long way up to the next one, but anything is possible today. And if we look at the value range that I thought, I basically drew it from yesterday's high down to this LVN, and we're in that top half of that value area. The reason why I actually wanted to drag this chart along is not necessarily to talk about the TPO and this estimated value range for ETH that I always talk about. One of the things that I talk about are statistics, and if I just drag over those statistics. So one of the things that I do talk about in the statistics is the relative volume. What I don't often show you is the chart behind it, and I thought I'd show it today because it was actually useful to help with identifying the potential chop that we got for the first 2-3 hours of the London Open. So if you can see that I've got lots and lots of charts that feed some of my statistics. I don't actually look at them. They're just there for the statistics. I do look at this one occasionally. I just moved a bit further over so we can see it all. And again, I've shaded in grey the ETH. And if I just zoom in, the relative volume is actually the area that's under the purple line here. I've just got it as a transparent purple. And all I'm really trying to show here is that after the Japan Open, we've basically been trending down in relative volume all day. And again, that continued right into the London Open. It's only after the London Open that it began to slowly tick up. So when you see that, and if you have your time and sales or whatever else it is, and you can't really see the big players playing, it's not overly a surprise that we chop around as we did for 2 to 3 hours. It was quite a horrible session. I don't know if anybody traded it here, but it was quite unpleasant. I think I've only had one trade all day, and that was in the Asian session. Okay, and just looking across at the NQ TPO again, I basically covered the entirety of yesterday's range and some. And yeah, it's mostly irrelevant, as I said the other day. When the ranges are this big, it doesn't have a lot of edge in providing you good turning points. It's just so wide. It just basically indicates to you, if you do use this kind of thing, that we can have large swings. Unfortunately today, because the big players were not there and they were probably saving their muster until the NFP release in a few minutes, we got a lot of chop until that drive at the breakfast opening at 7 a.m. Eastern when we went up. And now if we just switch across to the two markets, let's have a look and see where we are. So we've got 20 minutes, so we've got some time to actually have a good look at what's been going on, and we can even talk about some of that chop in London. Yeah, so you can see, for example, with this resting iceberg, which is still there and has been there, it has moved a couple of price levels, but it was placed at 2:41 before the London Open. The London Open is at 3 a.m. Eastern, and so effectively it's been there for 5.5 hours, or nearly 5.5 hours already. And if we zoom out and we make the map as dark as we can make it, you can see that they've used the resting liquidity in ES, which is definitely better than the NQ resting liquidity at the moment with those dreadful algo bands, but they've used it really to push down, to push price down to this resting liquidity at 4325. Sorry, the font is very slow, very small, and I apologize actually for that one. So let me just, I had forgotten now. On these webinars, I have it at a much bigger font, so that's me forgetting to reset it, but you can see me do it live, so you'll see what I did. Yeah, if you're projecting to anyone and they're on a high resolution screen, it does help, as I do remind myself to make sure that the numbers are legible. And again, I apologize for that. But yes, they were using that resting liquidity to push price down to this zone here, where it looks like they're absorbing sellers to drive them back higher towards that resting iceberg and settlement, which is up above there somewhere. In fact, settlement is at 433.575, so really just above here, just around about there. If I dig out the pen, and yeah, it's really around about there, but I'll have to get rid of that because it will get in the way if we leave it there. So yeah, the point of that is that once again in ETH, if you can find meaningful resting liquidity, and we're talking about large liquidity, it can really be useful, especially when you've got one of these awful chop days. Hey Tom, welcome. I'm actually going to use the Financial Juice feed, and we'll have that live in the room at 8:25, Tom, so I hope you can hear it. They are my friends, so I don't imagine they will mind. Okay, and what's quite interesting over here in NQ is that we've got all these sell icebergs. What that can mean some of the time is that they're absorbing buyers for a push down. But on this occasion, I have a feeling it's hedging their bets. So you know, it would not surprise me if it didn't go up another 100 points. But who knows? Maybe they're taking profits from a drive from a couple of days ago. It is impossible to know exactly why they put these in place. One thing I have put on the charts today, and I've done it for a reason, is I've got the sub panel for the MBO stops and icebergs, and the reason I've got that sub panel visible today is because I have my stops and icebergs filtered by quite a large amount, so that you wouldn't be able to see these icebergs here. Oh, sorry, you might not be able to see the stops here. So let's have a look. Yeah, there's a small stop level there, for example, and because my filter level is quite high, you can't see that there were any MBO stops there. So I just thought it might be interesting during the course of this webinar, especially with non-farm payrolls, to see how that sub panel may actually help us in determining, you know, when stops are being hit or when they are absorbing people. But we shall see. You can never predict whether something is going to be really useful or not. Okay. I'm just looking across at other levels that that could be of import today. So one thing I didn't really point out on this TPO here was that that is actually on the TPO itself a poor TPO. It's not, I wouldn't say it's a poor volume profile high, but it's a poor TPO in that you've got price at two price ranges, and the price ranges are in 30-minute increments, and it spent 2 there. So that, according to this particular setup of the TPO, counts as poor. And normally it has a reasonably reliable statistic that it does get taken out in the RTH session, or the following RTH session. So we shall see whether it does today or not. And yeah, just to remind ourselves, as we've got time still, what time is it? 8:15, of these naked volume points of control. There's 2 in particular that could play out during this news release or early in the RTH session. So you've got the one there at 437.50, and there's another one there at 439.450. But what is important to note, maybe I'll just make this a bit bigger and I will draw on it, is that you've got this big value range up above. So once we get into that, those of you that love volume profile will know that there is one statistic once you get back into volume area to traverse the entire value area. So in other words, if we manage to get back up into here, then there's a potential to go all the way up to the other side again. So it'll be interesting to see if that does play out in the next few days. I don't tend to trade swings that large in futures, as I've said before. I tend to prefer to play them in either ETFs, individual stocks, or in vertical spreads in options. Let me just get rid of that again. Now we'll just get rid of those time and sales for you, so I'm not blocking the bookmap thing. Yeah, so if you're wondering why I do have those kind of time and sales on this chart, this is not the monitor that I use for Bookmap ordinarily. Ordinarily, Bookmap is on a much bigger screen, so I have odd things which change from week to week on this chart, on this monitor rather. So it's interesting to note again that they are holding these sell icebergs. And what we want to see here, as I've said before, is the delta tail. So is there going to be a huge green delta tail? And if we do have a spike up, can we get back the other side of that delta tail? And then there's a potential short on it in that situation. But because we have a major news release, and we've had quite a few this week, but this is the biggie of the entire week. Yeah, it's one of those where I think they're probably just hedging their bets. Let's have a look in NQ as well. Let's zoom out vertically and horizontally so we can get a good idea if there's anything hiding away. So we've got this round number liquidity at 15,000. And if you note where we are in NQ, we're at 14,961. And when you get as close as that to a great big round number, and thousands are huge round numbers, 14,000, 15,000, and I think the high is just over 16,000. That's the all-time high, somewhere around that. Once you get close to it, again, there is another statistic floating around, or a probability that we're going to get very close to it. I think if you actually measure to, if we get to within 2 to 3 points, the statistic is more meaningful than if you measured whether we get exactly to the 1,000 level. But it's one of those ones where it's also really hard to put that into a spreadsheet. It's one that is better to eyeball yourself and just note. I just find that might be easier, especially with the amount of data that's involved. Where are we now? 8:18. I'm just going to check across to see if there are any questions. Not that many people watching today on YouTube, but that's okay. It's the end of the week. I'm actually looking forward to next Tuesday's, because I always talk about what happens at the London Open, but I don't think I've actually done one where we do the preparation live. So we'll take into account what happens that day, Tuesday, and let's hope it's an active day at the German Open, and do some live prep and really stalk trades, and hopefully we're not going to get the crazy level of volatility that we're likely to get tonight. This kind of thing, if you did place a bet before the non-farm payrolls release, you've just got to cross your fingers that your stop isn't going to get slipped by too much if you are wrong. And that's I won't say that I've never traded these releases. I've traded them from time to time, but it's one where you have to realize that even if you're right, they may well be a fake out move first, and it may well go through your stops and then go in your favor by 100 points or so in NQ, or by 30 or 40 points in ES. So there is a lot of danger involved. Yeah. Judging by what we saw the other day as well, with this resting iceberg just above the market going into these releases, I'd say the statistical likelihood, if that resting iceberg stays put, the statistical likelihood is that it will get taken out either way. That's, even if the market ends up going down, it's likely that they would take that out first. So let's just watch and see if that does play out. Again, I cannot predict the future. I don't predict the future. I'm just saying that it is likely, because it has been there all for the last 5 and nearly 6 hours by the time the non-farm payrolls comes out. So let's also have a look, since some of NQ at this stage, because ES is basically grinding, some of NQ is probably more tradable in terms of playing for that. Um, so if you look over here, it looks like we have had maybe a one tick spring just over here. But there's no really good triggers in that. You've got a small delta tail, you've got some targets up above to play for, but the problem that I think most people are going to find, including me, is that if you went for this trade here and say you were going for this spring, if there is a spring or a double bottom, where are you wrong? I'd say judging on the level of volatility that we've had even in ETH for the last couple of weeks, I'd say the minimum stop range that I would have been looking at in ETH has been 6 points, maybe fractionally less in Asia, but not in Europe. So, where you've got something like that, I mean, I have my the same dollar value risk on every single trade, but the number of contracts is calculated on the risk size. But the most important part of this is sticking to your stops once you've set them. And the hardest thing there is where you've got a nebulous stop is to remind yourself of that if it did go down 6 points and you've taken that trade as a spring or whatever, you take your stops and you walk away and you don't become attached. But it's part of the difficulty of something like that where it's not clear because there's no trigger. I'd say there was no real trigger there in terms of taking that. So yeah, that's just by the by, looking at springs as we wait for the news release. I'm going to turn on the feed now so that people should hear it, and I'll just get people to check that they can hear it. Marius, if you can confirm you can hear that on Discord, that would be great. I'm pretty certain YouTube will be able to hear that. The only problems I've had recently are with Discord. What time is it now? I just don't want to, it's 9 minutes, so maybe I actually should turn it off. I should turn it on again in about 3 minutes. They just started rattling on or prattling on, so anyway, if anybody could hear that and they want to confirm that they can hear that, that would be great, but I'll just turn it off for the time being. Oh, yeah, it's disappointing, Marius. Yeah, because I did make 100% certain that the right audio input feed, which includes that that browser where Financial Juice is, was getting fed into both. Anyway, I'll rewatch a little bit of this on YouTube later and see whether the YouTube was definitely working or not. And let's have a look at ES in terms of if you've got this resting liquidity that we'd pointed out, and we'd made a calculated bet that that was going to get taken out at some point in this 8:30 release, and you'd missed the 7:30 drive up. What is the best way you could get into this one? Because there's no easy tail here. There's no easy little spring, so it's really quite a tough decision. But again, I think it's all going to be based on the R ratio, that's the R multiple that you are comfortable with on the basis of what a typical stop in this environment is. Is it something where you'd go for 3 points as a stop, or 2.5 points, or 2 points? If you went for the 4 points of stop, it really is cutting into your R multiples that you can gain. Remember, the wider the stop, the harder it is to achieve those R multiples. So the way I do it is that it doesn't really matter to me whether my stop is 4 points or 3 points or 2 points. It is the same dollars that are being risked. I'm aware that it's more likely that they're going to take out a 2-point stop than a 3-point stop, but it depends on the trigger as well. So in other words, I'm just saying that I like my tighter stops because it gives me the chance to get into those R multiples, and win rate becomes less important if you're hitting your 2 or 3 R's on a few trades. What time is it now? We're coming along to 8:24. It's just we're in this pre-game mentality at the moment. So looking across at both NQ and ES, let's see how far we are from settlement. On NQ, we're 26 points below, and on ES, We are only about 3 points away. And importantly, let's get rid of that and remind ourselves again what is above. And the slightly worrying thing for people hoping for a really big bull run is that there is nothing above, and that you've got these liquidity levels below in ES, and some of them, when we scroll back, have been there quite a few hours. So if that's the beginning of the Asian session here. It is the entire Asian session, 1800. Um, they've been there for nearly the entire session. I mean, effectively, they've this one there, that one there, and that one there have been there for the entire session since the Japan Open, and that's quite a long time. So, does that mean that they'll get hit? We will have a look, and it looks like that iceberg has finally been removed. So they got people to get up to it as much as possible. So we'll have to see now whether they absorbed a few people. It's interesting that they took it off a good few minutes before, not at 8:28 or 8:29. But the resting liquidity is still there, and that has not really abated. It's still 155. So if we look at the actual numbers in the order book, so you've got 155, 156 there. You've got 178 there. You've got a much bigger number for 4225. You've got 222. And then we've got this big number, 424 at 4316. The reason why we're going through these is to really look at the difference in size. And does something really stand out that's been there all day? And I think that one had been there all day. Yes, it has. And then put your marker in your notebook. It's one of those things you don't expect them to go there in a straight line. Expect it to go as bullish as it can possibly be, and then suddenly it will go towards that. It's the thing. If you play for it all day long, you'll miss out on some great longs. In other words, if you play for it all day long to go short towards that 4316 level, you'd miss out on a lot of really good shorts like this drive up at 7 o'clock towards the resting iceberg and settlement up there. Okay, I'm going to turn that feed back on. Okay, so we've now taken out where that resting iceberg was, and they've added a new iceberg there, and you can see that through here. So you can see the iceberg level of 51 in this zone. What time are we at? So we've got 2.5 minutes. I just want to see that 4316 level holding or not. Yeah, they've actually nice banding around here. That is quite interesting. Again, you cannot predict the future, so when you see me scrolling down and having a look and having a think about whether they're likely to hit that, it is just an idea that I might have if a short setup appeared to me after the release of this 8:30 news. Again, I'm not trading this session because I'm talking in a webinar, so I'm not going to try and trade. So my live trading engine is not on at the moment. And remember, I consider these resting liquidities in ES to be of much higher value than the ones in NQ, especially lately because of all those volatility bands that have been appearing. Okay, I'm going to turn up my own financial juice feed in my headphones. So you're getting some of this pre-activity. So we've had a couple of spikes up that are reversed. And again, that's interesting as well. I mean, if you go back to yesterday's European action, what you will see on the drive up was that every time they had any little spike down, it got brought back immediately. So it was just like bounce, like a V bounce on all these micro lows in the European session. All right, and what we had just then was not quite that. So I'm not overly bullish going into this one, has to be said. But again, the idea is not to be right or wrong. The idea is to capitalize when you get multiple R setups. So we've got 25 seconds left. We might need to zoom out a little bit and have a look again to see what's being left there. So they've taken away everything except this at 17 and 14. I'm hoping my feed is not going to lag. NQ's got a lot more volatility so far. And up we go. There we go. And we're driving up. So that is why we say it is not a game of being right or wrong. So far we've had a very, very good run up. What do we do at this point? We get our drawing tool out and we do a horizontal line effectively. It's hard to say, but basically around about there. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it's actually up there. Maybe it's around about settlement. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. Let's just watch what happens. See if we're going to keep grinding up. And as we said about NQ, when you get that close to 1,000, a round number, quite often they go and tag it. On this occasion, they've gone through quite well. So they're already at 40 above it. So since the release has changed the picture. So the action is quite bullish since the release. Now we've got the buy icebergs underneath, and we've got some liquidity that's appearing up above. So far things are quite bullish. Probably need to move that. I'll add another one actually. Let's just add another horizontal line because I think the scene of the crime was more about this level here. Just drag across what that says as well. I reckon the font will be too small, but you might be able to read that one. That the non-farm payrolls is 150 against a forecast of 180. But what is not important is what the actual numbers are usually, because we are not trading economics. We're trading the market and the market's reaction to those numbers. As a reminder of what I said about trend days and major market releases in the 8:30 time slot or the 8:15 time slot, is that quite often the extreme of the session, if it's a trend up day, the low, and if it's a trend down day, the high, are made within 15 minutes of that release. So what I'm really looking for is, will there be a down move, and where will it go to if there is a down move? Because so far we've grinding up and up and up. I'm looking across again at that naked volume point of control. Sorry, that's me on my TPO. And we're getting reasonably close. We're only 15 points below it. So this is the first down move we've seen in NQ. You've got that lovely thick liquidity zone just there that they're coming into. I have to see if it holds or they go through with volume. That's what I'm interested in. So I'm expecting it to tag this. It's gone through, it's bounced. I was watching the NQ one because the liquidity they provided there was easier to read than anything they really provided in ES. So they went through it, they collected more shorts, and then they had a violent move up. I may actually just have a look at just having a look at the dollar correlations as well. I'm just seeing the euro dollar, the euro against the US dollar, that has spiked upwards. Oil has spiked upwards. UVXY has spiked downwards. So everything is very, very bullish at the moment. It's all consistent with each other. And NQ is at highs of the day, and ES has just made a high of the day. One thing I'm a little bit suspicious about is that there was no fake out type move whatsoever there, and there was no return to the scene of the crime. If there is no return to the scene of the crime at this point, it's it's one of those things where you can research yourself, when or if that scene of the crime is later hit. So again, if we look at NQ, you can see a lot of icebergs on this run down. We're back at this liquidity zone, and the news really did come in around about there, the 830. So if we draw a line on the NQ one, we get it approximately around about there. I don't think that's exactly right. It's just an approximate line. It's hard to get it exact when you're doing a webinar at the same time. You can see those sell icebergs building up through this sub panel, so it's providing some utility in that respect. But you could also see them on the chart itself. And on the ES, you've got both buy and sell icebergs. They're trapping it in this zone. Working out the 15-minute period as well. So if we are currently at 8:36, 8:37, we've still got plenty of time to make that extreme if we are into another trend day. We've already had one trend day this week. If you look back on the statistics of trend days versus distribution type days, choppy, normal kind of days, the older statistics were that only 20% of days were trend days, but certainly during that great run up in 21-22, there were an awful lot of trend days. So the statistics have changed somewhat to say that trend days have increased in terms of overall percentage of day types on the ES and NQ. So this is interesting here in ES. So we're trapping in a zone. So we'll look over here at the volume profile. We can always zoom out and see what happens when we break out of this zone. And we've got this liquidity they're advertising there as, even though it's a round number, as something worth tagging because it's in the 250 range. And we have an overnight high now made in ES at 57, that's 4357, and in NQ at 15064. I'm also watching what's going down in terms of the size of the trades in ES. I've got some volume dots on here at the moment. It's not very, very easy to see. And that's one of the reasons why I have that time and sales as a reference. I think, probably quite a few viewers do use some form of time and sales. I'm not one of those people that likes staring at time and sales. I just like having them as a reference so I can scroll to and just double check that the size of the trade that I thought had hit did in fact hit. It's quite interesting over here in NQ to see all these icebergs. You don't normally see this many icebergs in a little patch on a big upswing. So immediately you think the likelihood is they are absorbing some buyers for a push down. So we shall have to see, because it's been so bullish across the board, and I can't see anything in the correlated markets showing any signs of that abating yet either. Looking at the Dow has come down a fraction off its high. The RTY is coming off a fraction as well. Just seeing if there's an obvious leader in the four markets. Yeah, it's one of those things as well. I don't have the Dow and RTY futures displayed in Bookmap because I don't actually use them in Bookmap, but it does not mean I don't watch what they're doing. Quite often, when the market's been on a tear for a few days, one of the first signs that that tear might be turning around is if there is disparity between those four indices. In other words, they're all over the place. They're not all going up and they're not all going down. There's significant divergence between a couple of them. One's going up quite a bit and the other one's going down quite a bit. That's one of the reasons why I like watching them. I also find RTY to be an intriguing market that I only trade very rarely. Tapesh just asked a question on the time and sales. Tapesh, first and foremost, I'm an ETH trader. I trade the first 2, maximum 3 hours of the US RTH session. So yes, I have to change that time and sales block size filter between ETH and RTH, because the ones in ETH just aren't going to be appropriate in RTH, especially in ES. NQ is a very thin market, so you could get away with not changing your filter too much, but not in ES. So in ES, I want to see things appear on that time and sales in ETH. So at the moment, I've got a filter like 20 in ETH, but when we get to RTH, I'm not interested in seeing those trades. I'm only interested in seeing things really basically around the 100 up. I hope that answers your question. I've got a question in YouTube as well. The numbers on the right. Carl Jones just asked a question. Read the screen on the right. So you're talking about the ES Bookmap screen. Are the numbers stop losses? No, they're not. Oh, you mean on the right of the sub panel? Sorry, I'm having to put words in your mouth. I think that's what you mean. No, I mean, if we look at these numbers here, they will be the net over a certain period of the icebergs, and so if it's minus, there'll be more icebergs underneath this zero line, which suggests they're buy icebergs, and if they're above, then it's sell icebergs. And the stops, again, just over a set number of minutes or seconds. It's just the total number of MBO stop orders. Just because it's an MBO stop order does not necessarily mean it's a stop run. An MBO stop order is just an order that is placed by way of a stop. So, for example, if you're trading a thin market, you might get in to a trade by a buy stop, as well as be triggered on your exits by a stop. For all my exits, I always use proper stops, not stop limits. So market stops, and actually, if I am entering, I do it by a variety of different orders. So if it's in ES, I'll try and get an equal number of limits as I do market orders, because sometimes you can. So sometimes it just has this habit of coming back, so you can get in by limit order. In NQ, most of my entries are market orders, but occasionally I do get in by a buy stop above a market, or a sell stop below the market if I'm looking for something in particular, because it moves like grease lightning. And provided you've got your stop set and you're in a zone where you wanted to transact, you have to accept you're going to slip in NQ anyway. So quite often it does not matter. And if you're trying to get a limit order in NQ all the time, good luck, or you're trying to fade it, and it can go a lot further than you think it can. Okay, so in NQ we've got this banding. I'm trying to work out if this, yeah, this is still the algos. I always forget for a second, when I look away from NQ that we are in this horrible December algo contract, where you've got these algos above and below, where you cannot treat those as meaningful liquidity. They're just the market maker is above and below, so you have to ignore them. You can't filter them out on this heat map, so you just have to not pay too much attention to them. Looks like we're going to continue to be quite bullish pre-market, so that if there is any kind of downside movement, it's going to be in the RTH, given the fact that we've now crossed the 15 minutes since the news release. So essentially, if you looked at a 3-minute chart, I'm going to drag one across as well. I'm going to drag my old trading view chart across, drag it over there, and you can see that both NQ and ES shot up and they are forming a range at the top, right? That can go both ways, but once you get a range on a big swing, the likelihood is it's going to continue. It doesn't mean that it's going to work 100%, just the likelihood. And the likelihood could be somewhere near 50%. It's definitely not a 90% or even an 80% on that one. Yep, so they are exploring onwards here. So we look up above in ES, and we've now got some liquidity of good size at 4360. Sorry, Carl, I wasn't looking in YouTube. I was paying attention to this resting liquidity up here. Let me just read your other two questions. The dotted lines, the screen on the right, the dotted lines. You don't mean the sub panel? Because I'm trying to see what you meant by the dotted lines there. Oh, you're talking about the vertical dotted lines. Oh, I get you. No, those are icebergs actually. So if we go into the settings for this, and again I apologize for the fonts being so small, and you go down to just looking for the iceberg settings, so I haven't changed them for so long. Iceberg visual settings, and then you go down to this section of them. You can basically set what you want by way of colors, but I'm pretty sure that you can't actually change it between a line or a dotted line. I think they are dotted line by default. But those are all the settings that I've got in there, so you can just see that the filter I've got is an aggregated filter of 50 and an individual filter of 5. But if you've got the sub panel on, the filter doesn't matter as much because you're going to see every single one of those. In other words, the sub panel is not filtered. Okay, so I wasn't paying attention to NQ. So we've got this thick liquidity band, which was not the algo band. You can see that because the algo bands have been moving. They move constantly with price. This one was stable, and it was placed at 835. So we got right up to it, acted as a wall of resistance, and we came off it. And if we now then zoom right into the action over here and have a look, is anybody trapped? There may be some people trapped just above 15057. And where have we gone on ES? We've got up to this. If we call this entire thing a liquidity band, because if we zoom out, will they eat straight through this? That's the question. Or is this a wall that's going to hold for a few minutes? Let's just have a look at the what's hitting this on the low. Now there's no clues from the end of that tail as to whether there was a continuation likelihood or not. That's what I was looking at. I often look at that when I zoom right into the latest action on the right hand side. I'm looking to see what has transacted at the extremes. But no, that just looks like a liquidity drop to get some more fuel to go up and take that out. And that's exactly the same case in ES. And again, looking across at all the correlated markets, there is not any real hint of weakness. The weakest one that I can see on my charts is crude oil. So crude oil has had a decent pullback since it reached its high as well. Everything else, all four indices are at their highs. So we're still in the exploration trending up stage. And if we go into the micro action, which is something that I do talk about regularly as well, and I'll just scroll this one across. Since we got back down to this resting liquidity here, and we look at every single one of these little lows, they're all incrementally higher. If they're just slightly lower, that's kind of irrelevant. It's like an equal low, but there's nothing by way of a lower low on the micro swings yet. So this could be the first one if they do actually go down. So there's the dotted lines that Carl was talking about. So that was actually a buy ice that was up there of 85. And they took the buy ice away. So yeah, if we're looking at our first setup, we've had a really good run in NQ. We had some really interesting resting liquidity, and then we had the reverse spring or up thrust. That's probably the first short setup that we've had of any note since that market release. Apart from that, they were basically taking every pullback and going long. Let's just zoom out again and watch what's left above us. So we've taken out a band of liquidity here. Has it got enough strength from other players to go straight up and through it? That is the question. I know I have zoomed out vertically, but I'm just really looking at why have I zoomed out vertically, because I'm looking to see on a holistic basis what is happening to these three liquidity bands, 1, 2, and 3. This band up here seems fairly stable, but it may not be in play just yet. So I was just seeing whether they were using this to push us back down to this, which is at 4,350. And at the same time, we've got NQ zoomed in a little bit more. The Dow finally had a pullback, and the Russell, the RTY, is hitting at new highs again. So that is the strongest of all four. So three of them have had a smallish pullback, if you count this in ES as a pullback, and the RTY has had nothing. But what you'll find if you do end up trading RTY is that on those kind of moves where it just goes up and up and up, when it finally does have a pullback, it'll be much deeper than you think it will be. It's one where those, all the swings are a little bit crazy. So yeah, if you bear with me while I constantly zoom in and out. I don't do this with my other charts. So I've got charts in Sierra which I don't touch. I just have value in doing this in Bookmap because one, I can do it ridiculously quickly, so you can just flick your finger on the mouse wheel, and two, I get value from seeing how these liquidity games are playing out. So that's why I do it. I do hope I don't give people nausea watching this on YouTube. And it's also something that is very pertinent if you trade thin markets, because quite often in a thin market you're not going to see, if you've got this zoomed in, say we have NQ zoomed right in, and we've got virtually every price level. Now I've got every price level with a number on it. You're not going to see half of the games that are being played that will directly impact what's happening at this price level, because the pressure or the magnetism is being applied out of screen. So that's one of the reasons why I do that. I mean, when I do zoom out, you can see why I do it. So we have a high in place, and how secure is that? Looking at the shape of the volume profile, I wouldn't call it a very, very strong high. That's when you have it basically being climactic. That's what I call a really, really strong high, where you've got this part that is just basically next to no volume. They've explored, and there was nobody interested in that price. That kind of is what I call a really, really strong high. And I do my own volume profile. I've read lots of books, I've watched lots of people, but I just do it for me in the way I execute my trading plan and the types of setups I'm looking for. So they may not be technically what other people do, but that is still fine with me. But even though it's not a completely strong high, it's a reasonable high. So if you look at the shape, let me just drag it around. So when we get our pen out, this is the NQ one. It's got a nice distribution there. So we're in a distribution. So it's quite possible that we'll go to both sides of that before we continue up or down. Get rid of that. And if we have a look at ES, it's a little bit more. It's a little bit stronger than the one in NQ. Yeah, and what I just bear in mind is that we are bullish until we're not. So in other words, these markets tend to explore until they've finished exploring, but there are some interesting levels for them to go and try and tag in RTH, such as that scene of the crime and even settlement now, because we are well above settlement. We are still about 20 points above settlement. Yeah, we're above settlement and we're above yesterday's high. So there's a gap close that's a potential trade. But when you do trade the open, what I've found as well, when you have those gap closes, on a trend continuation, if this is effectively an uptrend and then the rest of the RTH session is a continuation of that uptrend, then there might be an initial attempt at the fade that will fail quite quickly. Whereas if they are going to close it, quite often they'll have a continuation for a good few minutes, maybe a couple of minutes, maybe 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, and then it will fall down. So if there is no initial attempt to close that gap, as in zero initial attempt, then I might start looking at an interesting short, especially it depends on what the internals are, and by internals I'm talking about all the stuff that you've seen me on my statistics, and also just having a look at the key stocks and what's being played out on those. So NQ has now made some nice lows. Having a look across, RTY is still at its high of the day, so that one has kept going, and all the other three are showing some signs of pulling back. We've now got some interesting liquidity again down at the 4350 level. Let's just zoom all the way back in and see what's left down below. So all of a sudden you've got this order which was there at 4316. Now it's been moved down to 431250 and it's been increased. Again, don't just play for these things based on liquidity, because that is not a winning recipe in my personal opinion. Stick to your plans, stick to your structural setups, and if you get into a trade and then that becomes a potential scale target, your final scale, then that can be the day where you just keep holding some of your position. But they're not something I'd necessarily just play for, especially if they're below and the market's been ripping up all week. So this area is now getting quite interesting because they've got a thick band here. And it's a question really of how strong is this sell iceberg at 4356.25, and whether, if you're going to use that as a stop zone, just a few ticks, maybe a couple of ticks above that, and then go for a short, or even if a first target of the other way around. If the distance between, let's have a look. So if the distance of this mini range, the height of the mini range is 4356.25 down to 4355, so it's 5 ticks. The first target should be this liquidity, so you do not want to take a wide stop. So I'm just saying that if you got in just then when it tagged that, if you'd had a limit order at 4356.25, you'd want to be scaling out straight away once it got down to there, and you'd really want a stop of 2 to 3 to 4 ticks, because that is not a typical swing. That's more of a semi-scalp, and at the moment it's just bouncing between them. So that if you'd got in there and you hadn't taken anything off, then you might find that you're breaking even at best. So they're holding it with a 200 stop, and they've got a 214 below. So this is just a holding pattern. They're just keeping price contained. When it finally does break out, it should be interesting. It should move relatively quickly, one might think, but we'll see, because we cannot predict the future, as I keep saying. But then I say things like that. So the theory is that when you're in a tight range that's stayed for a while and built up a lot of volume, then when you do finally break it, then it may move more quickly through the space previously where less volume was transacted. And if you go back left, there was less volume transacted there. Anyway, I think I'm coming up to my 9 o'clock. In fact, I've gone past it. So thank you very much for bearing with me. I will hang up now, and look forward to seeing those of you who are going to be around on Tuesday at that London Open. Let's hope we have a volatile open. So thank you very much for